I would like to invite to the stage the venerable Chris Wilson. I'm going to invite him up. He is going to be sharing with us ongoing development in redesigning and optimizing how dynamic ISF is implemented in ORF-based systems. And if you know what all that means, you are doing well. Okay. Hi, Chris. I'm going to get your slides going here.
Hi, Amy.
Hey.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, there we go. All right, and I'll hop off and let you take it away.
Okay. Here we go. Dynamic ISF updates. Go ahead to the next slide, Amy. I first presented an initial equation for adjusting the ISF in ORF-based systems in November 21 at a D-Data event. It's been integrated into Android APS, IAPS, and Trio, although there's been some variation in how it's been implemented. And so I'm going to go through what I've seen, some of the work that I've done on trying to find new equations that are better fits, and also some additional proposed improvements towards automating some settings over that I've seen over the last 4 years or so. Next slide. So here's the proposed changes. The first is a new equation that will have a more sigmoid shape. It's actually really just a limit, adjusting where there's a zero crossing in the equation and putting a limit there. And then also automating the adjustment factor so that it doesn't need to be tweaked as often for people who have big variations day to day or week to week in their insulin needs. And then also some considerations around meal handling. Next slide. So the new equation, you can sort of see it's the blue line here. The green line is actually what I proposed at the D-Data event 4 years ago. The red line you see there is what was actually implemented in Android APS and the other ORF-based systems as the quote-unquote logarithmic dynamic ISF. And then the blue is what I am proposing today. You can see that it sort of splits the difference in some places, especially at higher blood glucose levels, and gets more sensitive as blood glucose drops off. That should help alleviate some of the concerns regarding lows that occurred under certain circumstances there. Next slide. Here's sort of the reasoning, and this is a zoom in if we flip the equation over. So this is 1 over all of the original equations. You can see that the blue line, which is what I'm proposing, crosses 0. And just for reference, the heavy black line there that you see is the 1800 rule if you're using a static ISF in your system. But the blue line where it crosses the x-axis or the y-axis, sorry, that would be a hard limit. And so if you flatten it out there, because that's how hyperinsulinemic clamp works, is that there is a limit to how low you can push glucose output from the liver, and any extra insulin beyond that is only having peripheral effects. So that's sort of what we would expect based on what we see in the operation of things like HE clamps. So that's at least the logic behind that portion of the change. Next slide. The other piece is the adjustment factor. I did attempt to do a survey to look at how people were doing this, but due to the sort of herding cats nature of folks using DIY systems, people are compensating for the same problem using a number of different things. And so when I looked at the data, there weren't a whole lot of responses. There were only about 30 people that responded. And then taking into account sort of the way that they were potentially compensating for all of this stuff, what I wound up just looked like somebody shot a shotgun at a sheet of paper. There was no discernible pattern there. But from what I've seen and and conversations that I've had with a number of expert users, the sort of idea of the adjustment factor being roughly to 0.02 times TDD seems to be a fairly reasonable basis point. So if we put everything together, this would be the new equation that would be used. Obviously, the 55 there is the half-life of the insulin that's assumed, 55 minutes. And it winds up, it would be total daily dose and then total daily dose times 0.02. So you put it all that together, you get total daily dose squared. But I was able to run this equation back against the original data set and compared to what we saw versus the current equation that's in use, the mean percent error was basically cut in half against all of those points. So it's a significant improvement in fit. Next slide. The other piece of this, and wow, I am going really fast, is meal handling. We see that when we have carbohydrates that are, either don't require metabolism at all in the case of glucose through the liver, or only require like first pass metabolism through the liver to get converted into glucose. If you look at the math sort of in 4 dimensions, it pushes blood sugar up, but it doesn't necessarily actually increase the rate of glucose output from the liver. So you get a steep rise, but then it'll fall back down, but people correct for the rise if you're only looking at the blood sugar, and that can result in a roller coaster. I've noticed this myself with things like having a muffin for breakfast. Dynamic ISF will overreact to the rise, and then you wind up sort of having to avoid a low. It's easy to eat half, and then eat the other half to sort of counter the low, but that's not ideal. So the proposed solution here would be to potentially have a prompt when a meal is detected to say, hey, is this a carb heavy meal? Is this candy? Or is this a normal mixed meal? Or is this potentially a big, long fat and protein heavy meal like pizza or pasta? And adjust how aggressively the system kicks in with the corrections as a way to do that. I know that some of the variants in Android APS, some of the branches have taken that approach. So I guess that's basically about it. I know that there was a question when I presented this 4 years ago regarding what's the explanation for this and this effect, since we don't see it in clamp studies. I want to address that. The thing is that a clamp study eliminates the effect of glucose output from the liver. The whole point of needing extra insulin is to counter the fact that your glucose output is increased. We know that there's actually a spike in glucagon in response to a glucose rise, at least in a lot of cases. And so you wind up having to provide extra insulin to counter that effect. So that's about it. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. How much of the empirical data that Diaboloop has published has been factored into the updates you've prepared? I'm aware that Diaboloop has published data. I actually haven't seen it. I did reach out and try to get copies of what they presented at ADA, but I didn't get a response. So I know that it's there. I wish I had gotten a response, but it's not really a factor here. Somebody asked why the half-life is so short, and I think Tim actually responded to that 55 minutes is the experimentally established half-life for at least most modern rapid-acting insulins. But if you were to shorten it to, say, Technosphere insulin, which has a much shorter half-life, and look at the curves, you wind up with correction dosing that roughly approximates what they recommend, which is multiply what your injected dose would be by 2 and then do some rounding. So it at least fits with what we know is recommended for an insulin with a wildly different half-life.
All right. And then I see one more question about, is there any workaround or adjustments and settings in Trio? Do you see that one?
To prevent ISF to overactive sleep rise when treating low. Honestly, the workaround that I've been using most often is to briefly raise the target. We should bear in mind that all of this was developed based assuming a target of 100 milligrams per deciliter or 5.5 millimoles, and adjusting the target away from that can cause it to behave differently because you're increasing the percentage of extra insulin or the percentage of insulin that you're withholding. Yes, as Tim notes, set a high temp target for an hour. It doesn't have to be that high. I think I usually raise it to 100 or 115 or to 110 or 115 from 100.
All right, guys, as last chance, if you have a specific question for Chris, you can plug it in the Q&A. Otherwise, he is going to be leading the table discussion on this topic later, so you'll get to interact with him more. Good. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks for being with us. And yeah, people can seek you out later in the day and find your table and talk about this more. Thank you so much. I'm going to take you off stage now. Hold on.
All right. Thank you.